What I'm going to be talking about today is a recent series of new studies that we're doing on how stuff spreads online, how content travels the social web. So I guess what I'm going to be talking about in terms of big data is big social data. I know you know the answer to this, but just to introduce the talk, what makes social data big? Basically volume, so amount of stuff that comes through. Velocity, how quickly it comes through and how quickly you have to write it and analyze it and index it. Variety, the mix of structured and unstructured and semi-structured data. Complexity, the amount of metadata that we need to add to the conversation that come through in order to make sense of it and add context to those conversations. And interactivity, the fact that these conversations change all the time, because it's not like a fixed data set, like financial operations is something that is constantly updated and you need to be constantly updating in real time. Now, traditionally, this has been the domain of social media monitoring, but the social media monitoring industry is one of the dullest industry on the planet, and is pretty much stuck in its old ways. The web has evolved, the way people communicate online has evolved, the technology behind the web has evolved, and yet social media monitoring basically still does what it used to do 10 years ago, keyword tracking, volume-based metrics, really basic, no context, no weight, just counting sheep, basically. So we tried to have a stab at kind of like inventing it a little bit, but as they would say in Game of Thrones, one does not simply create yet another social analytics platform, because there's 200 of them, so you need to come out with something that is really different to be able to make it useful and worthwhile investing money on. So what did we do new? The first thing that we did new was what I call nose-to-tail indexing. It's a bit like the new British cuisine. We don't just look at the content of the conversation, which is basically this bit, which is what social media monitoring platform focus on. We focus on the behaviors. So, for example, like at what time of the day do people tweet or post on Facebook or post on their blog? Their social graph, what they're connected to, their interest graph, what is their history in terms of past interest, and what is that kind of like, what does topicality looks like for each user, and then demographics. Who do they say they are online? So to give you an example on how that is useful is basically, I can look on this platform, which is called Pulsar Track, which stands for Topic, Audience, Reach, and Content. And I can simply type in MAMS, and the platform will give me anything that has been published in social media by someone that said that they are a MAM. Because it will look, for example, at the profile bio on Twitter and will identify and segment the data based on what they expressed in their profile bio. This is just an example on how you can use the extra data around the simple conversation. Then we wanted to move from analytics to intelligence. So from how many tweets per hour or how many negatives, we wanted to move to things like what time of the week is best for what kind of subject, what's the brand equity online, and we wanted to move into measuring the visibility of conversation. So a tweet is not, all tweets are not equal, and a tweet is not equal to a news article, but in social media monitoring platform, they all count as one. So what we wanted to do is to estimate the reach of these conversations across all the different media and weight the importance of these conversations so that we could tell you that if you have 99 negative tweets and a positive BBC article, probably your visibility is still positive because more people have been reached by the positive content rather than the negative one. We then devised a new way to sample social data. So whereas all the platforms do topic, so keyword tracking, put in a keywords, get back content and mention those keywords. What we do is also audience tracking. Define an audience, so define 50,000 people that are behaving in a specific way. For example, they follow The Guardian online, and then track any content that they produce. We've recently done a study on how the audiences of 6 UK newspapers are talking about Margaret Thatcher. So we looked at the 50,000 users that were following 6 different newspapers' Twitter accounts, and then we looked at how they were mentioning Margaret Thatcher, and then we segmented these mentions by newspaper audience, which is quite a different way of segmenting the data and collecting the data, because you basically get everything from a single person or from a set of users rather than only the thing that mentions specific keywords. And then we added another functionality, which is the content tracking. So you put in a URL and you get any conversation that mentions that URL, regardless of how it's been shortened, how it's been packaged. We unpack everything through DataSift, for example, in this case, and we analyze all the content that comes back that contains those conversations. And then we redesigned completely the way the interface works. So we use this metaphor, the data canvas, as in something that, an interface where the data is all you see on the platform, and you can visually go through the data and annotate the data, and you can mine the data visually, so you don't need to compile complex strings. You can pretty much understand most of it just mining the data visually, clicking through to the actual data all the time, because we believe that the only way to use big data in social media is to have complete data transparency, so have access to the root data that is making the visualization that you're looking at. I'm going to show you what we did with this platform, one of the things that we did. And I don't know if you've guessed what this case study is about. Any takers? And? That's a good one. So we compared how two of the biggest internet memes of the past 12 months spread online. So we looked at Gangnam Style versus Harlem Shake. And what we did to do this was using this content tracking functionality, and what we did was stick in 5 of the top videos for each meme, and then in all the different variants, because as you know, YouTube links have got many different variants, so you can't just track one. So 5 videos for each for each meme, and then we looked at what happened. When did it start? How did it spread? How fast did it go? Who was responsible for spreading it? What things could we learn from this analysis? First thing that we learned is that memes have different shapes. So memes are not created equal, in other words. What I mean by that is that this is the shape of Gangnam Style. By shape, I mean the ratio between the original seed, so the first video that gets posted, and all the variations that spin off the original video. So in the case of Gangnam Style, you have the original video, which is like 10 times bigger in terms of shares and attention and popularity than the variations that follow. If you look at Harlem Shake, it's completely the opposite. You have the original seed, which is actually smaller than most of the variations that have been spun off that video, which obviously creates some really interesting dynamics in terms of how the meme then behaves and spread. So one of the dynamics that are connected to this is the lifespan of a meme. So how long does this meme survive online? How long does it keep thriving and being viral? So we measure this by looking at how many consecutive days each of these memes were shared online at least 500 times. And on the left-hand side, you have Gangnam Style, 172 days. On the right-hand side, 29 days, Harlem Shake, which is shocking to the Americans. And when I've kind of like shown this to some American colleagues, I was like, oh, that's not possible. That's like, it's unbelievable. That is not true. That's bullshit. And it's like, well, actually, that's what happened. And I'll show you why they were so upset about it. But what we noticed is that there is a connection between the lifespan of the meme and the shape of that meme. And the connection is that whenever you have a kind of like social movement, which this is what we're talking about when we talk about memes, you basically need 3 stages for that movement to kind of like be strong. One is the friendship and the strong ties that make it start. So people that know each other, kind of like close-knit groups of people that make that happen and start sharing it. Then what you get is basically the communities or the weaker ties where the meme starts expanding to. But it's only when you get a leader in that creates new habits that teach people what to do about it that the meme really endures. And what we have with Gangnam Style is exactly this, like a focal point for the meme that provided kind of like a leadership figure and a strong narrative that drove the success of this meme through 172 days, which is frankly massive. But we learned a few other things. So what triggers these memes to go viral? The first thing that we've seen, and which is active in some of this video, is surprise. So you see something unexpected, and that thing triggers you to be wanting to talk about it because it's somehow newsworthy. The second element is that meme, you would have recognized this guy. This is Relevance Cat, one of the biggest other kind of like visual memes of the web. When something is relevant to a specific community, obviously those weaker ties make sure that things start thriving within that environment and people start sharing it. And the third element that makes something trigger and kind of go into a viral stage is endorsement from a public personality, or like a celebrity or a top-down media. A combination of all these things obviously made this meme very successful. One meme had a little bit less of the the third element. And we'll see in a few minutes that basically Gangnam Style had an amazing combination of all three of these, while the Harlem Shake only focused on these first two bits. Community relevance, also called relevance cut. You would say this is relevant to my interest in the meme caption. Regardless of the shape of the meme and of the lifetime, we kind of like saw the memes spread in waves. They don't spread consistently. People seem to kind of like get on and on with it, on and off with it. They forget about it and they go back onto it. And you see this basically typical structure of a meme thread. I've mapped all the different videos here for Gangnam Style, and you can see it spikes up and down all the time. And you can see, just to add a few data points to here, that the average share per day during the lifespan of the meme, which is this blue bar at the bottom, was 4,446 in a day across all the different videos. But you had spikes of 33,747 for one single video in a day, or 37,000 for, I think this is Britney Spears, when Britney Spears goes on TV and talks about Gangnam Style and shows that she's learning it. This is when, which one was this one? This is YouTube publishing YouTube Rewind, which is kind of like a YouTube edit of Gangnam Style. And then you have this interesting spike here, which when we saw it was like, wow, this is really amazing. Wow, what happened there? Like it seemed to be dying down on this video, and instead it's still kind of like going strong. And then we looked at the mentions by the hour for that day, and we saw this flat line here. And then we started to look at the accounts, and we started to look at like who was spreading it. Is there any influential people spreading it? Is there anything kind of like worth kind of like noticing? And we realized that most of these mentions were actually bots. So we realized that on that day, for some reason, spam bot network basically joined the Gangnam party. Now we don't know that 100% to do better analysis on that, but when you see that flat line during the day, that is pretty artificial. That is never like a kind of like an organic sharing line. This is what Harlem Shake looks like. Same structure, loads of spikes, and then a mega spike there, which is the Miami Heat video, which is the basketball team doing their own version of the Harlem Shake and tapping into their community and activating this community of millions of followers, which spiked more than anything. Now, we measure this kind of like spike property of our meme spread with what we call the coefficient of variation, which is basically looking at the standard deviation of the day rate of sharing of a meme divided by the mean of the sharing rate for that meme. And this is what it gave us. Basically, on an average day, Gangnam Style varies 196% on a day-by-day basis, while the Harlem Shake varies on a 217%. So let's say the Harlem Shake was slightly more volatile than Gangnam Style, but what's interesting is that they're extremely volatile. They can change from day one to day two. The other thing that we realize is that memes are global. So although they transcend geography, they need to have a really strong mix of global appeal and local relevance in order to be successful. Now, when we looked at the globality of these two memes, and by globality we mean the percentage of country diversity in the data set, the people that have been sharing the meme, we saw that Gangnam Style was way more global than the Harlem Shake. And that means that basically 41% of the conversation on the Harlem Shake were coming from people within the US, while 78% of the shares of Gangnam Style came from other countries other than the US. And you can see this in action when you look at the network of the diffusion map for the Harlem Shake. What this map shows you is a very kind of like simplified map. This is built on like hundreds of thousands of nodes, but what you're seeing here is basically only the people that have been generating retweets. And the more retweets they've generated, the bigger the node is. And the color of these edges is basically the country where these people are from. So what you can see here is that blue is from the States, yellow is from Spain, red is for Turkey, fuchsia is from the UK. What you can see here, and there's a bit of Brazilian green sparse around, what's interesting here is that if you pay more attention to specific nodes, is that these nodes, the top influential nodes for Harlem Shake, seem to be feeding and spreading content to people within their own country. So I'm from the US, and the people from the US are retweeting me. When you look at what happened with Gangnam Style, mega massive node, we're talking about like 8 times bigger in terms of a map. What you see, which is really interesting, is that the nodes from the US are feeding a global population, because you see all these different colors here. There are people from different countries retweeting something from the US. So, and you have at the same time some elements of local relevance, because you have stuff here that is specifically from one country rather than global, but you have a much bigger mix of different countries in there. And you can see this in action when you look at, for example, Katy Perry as opposed to Simon Pegg. But even Simon Pegg, although being more local, way more local than Katy Perry, he still has quite a healthy mix of different countries that are sharing from him. So what we learned from this was also that communities drive virality way more than influencers. We looked at the weighted degree of each node in these networks, and we looked at like what influential nodes, what share of the conversation were influential people responsible for. So how many of these shares were coming from retweets of influential nodes. And what we realized, basically 1% of the, only 1% of the conversation within the Harlem Shake meme was coming from influential people, was triggered by influential people, and only 5% in the Gangnam Style meme was coming from influential people, which is really interesting. That basically means that out of, for example, with Gangnam Style, out of 767,000 unique users that have mentioned Gangnam Style, only 64 generated more than 100 retweets, and only 8 generated more than 1,000. That basically means, as I was saying, only 5% of this conversation is coming from influential users. With the Harlem Shake, is even lower. With the Harlem Shake, you got 123,000 unique mentioners, of which only 7 have generated more than 100 retweets. So it's a completely organic spreading. And if you look at the modularity of these two networks, in one case you have modularity, the algorithm identifies 14,000 small communities in the Harlem Shake, in the Gangnam Style, while in the Harlem Shake network they identify at least 7,000 communities, which is a lot of small communities for something that has got such a close focus. Which also explain, and I'm kind of like drawing to the conclusion. How much time have I got? Good. That shareability doesn't necessarily mean popularity, which is another property that we have discovered by looking at this data set. And what I mean by that is that it's quite interesting to look at these two values together. So shareability is the amount of people that have been sharing the content versus the amount of people that have been watching the video online. So for each million of views of the videos from these two memes, 674 were sharing Harlem Shake, and 462 were sharing Gangnam. So that means basically that Harlem Shake had a higher shareability than Gangnam. The social currency of the Harlem Shake was higher than the social currency of Gangnam. So we thought, okay, maybe that means that it's going to be less popular. So less people are going to be tweeting about it because it's less shareable. When you look at popularity, which is the total amount of unique users that have been sharing that piece of content, you have the opposite result. So Gangnam is 7 times more popular than the Harlem Shake. And the reason why this is happening is because the shareability in the case of Harlem Shake was basically increased by the fact that Harlem Shake didn't have loads of mainstream and celebrity coverage, which made the meme more valuable in terms of currency within specific communities. And they also had a stronger tie into specific communities. So it was more relevant to the specific local group of people that were jumping into the versions of that video and sharing it. Whilst Gangnam Style had immediately backing from the likes of Britney Spears, T-Pain, Katy Price. So it went already, it went mainstream pretty soon, and that kind of like top-down element basically decreased the shareability of the meme, but at the same time gave scale to that meme. And I think that these are two really good points to take away from this analysis, which is that memes are a bit like currency. So managing a meme and trying to spread a meme is a bit like managing a monetary policy. You can have a contractionary or an expansionary policy. In other words, you can inject more cash into the market, but that decreases the value of the currency and it makes it less shareable. And this is what Gangnam Style did. But at the same time, you have scale. So exponential growth happens. Or you can control that the element of cash injection and be more kind of like contractionary and only appeal to specific smaller communities of people, which means that you're more shareable and your currency value has got a higher value, but you've got less scale because you're reaching out in a top-down way to less people. And that basically is what killed the Harlem Shake compared to Gangnam Style. That's it.